Along, my boy, John.
Oh, thank you, darling. Kate, you're not wearing a bustle.
The Wild West, a land of dusty saloons, steely-eyed lawmen, and outlaws on the run. But beyond the iconic gunfights and gold rushes, there is a whole hidden layer to this fascinating era. We all learn about Wyatt Earp and Billy the Kid, but what about the crazier, stranger stories that time almost forgot? Get ready to journey down a lesser-traveled path, where the Wild West gets not only wild, but wonderfully weird. The Traveling Corpse. Elmer McCurdy wasn't exactly a notorious outlaw, but he sure had a strange afterlife. Back in 1911, fueled by dreams of riches, he tried to rob a train in Oklahoma. Now, McCurdy thought the train was loaded with bank cash, enough to set him up for life. Turns out, he was barking up the wrong tree. The train was practically empty, and all McCurdy managed to get was a measly $46. Not exactly a career-defining heist. But wait, there's more. To add insult to injury, McCurdy didn't even get to enjoy his ill-gotten gains. Lawmen hot on his trail caught up with him just a few days later. A shootout ensued, and McCurdy met his end there in Oklahoma. Here is where things get bizarre. After his death, his body was embalmed using a common technique of the time, an arsenic-based treatment. But instead of a proper burial, McCurdy's corpse was sold to a traveling carnival. Apparently, his notoriety as a failed train robber was deemed good for business. So began McCurdy's unexpected second act, touring the Midwest as a sideshow attraction for 6 whole decades. The deceased outlaw's body was displayed at county fairs, haunted houses, and even wax museums. For over 60 years, McCurdy's embalmed body raked in far more money than he ever stole during his brief life of crime. His final resting place, believe it or not, became a funhouse in an amusement park, Long Beach, California, to be exact. In a twist of fate, it was 1976, and McCurdy was once again thrust into the spotlight, although unintentionally. A television crew filming for The $6 Million Man used McCurdy's body as a prop in the funhouse setting. During filming, things got even stranger. McCurdy's body, rather unceremoniously, started to fall apart. Depending on the story you hear, either a finger or an entire arm detached from the corpse. This grisly incident finally caught the attention of the authorities. The Los Angeles County Coroner's Office, understandably alarmed by the situation, took possession of the body and subjected it to tests. These tests confirmed the body was indeed that of Elmer McCurdy, the ill-fated train robber who had died over 65 years prior in Oklahoma. Thankfully, McCurdy's long and unusual journey finally came to an end. He was laid to rest in a proper cemetery, the famous Boot Hill Cemetery in Dodge City, Kansas. It wasn't exactly a hero's burial, but at least McCurdy, after a lifetime of misfortune and a truly bizarre afterlife, finally found some peace. The wild beverages of Wild West saloons. The Wild West wasn't exactly known for its fine dining or gourmet beverages. In fact, for a thirsty cowboy or weary traveler, a visit to a saloon could be a gamble in itself. Forget your fancy single malt scotches or small batch bourbons. The Wild West offered a different breed of whiskey altogether. These were beverages with names as colorful and unpredictable as the frontier itself. 40 Rod, Tarantula Juice, Taos Lightning. The list goes on. Just the names alone were enough to make a grown man gulp. But the real shocker was the content of these so-called elixirs. Modern-day connoisseurs would be horrified. These concoctions were potent beyond belief, sometimes laced with ingredients that would make a modern bartender faint. Strychnine, a deadly poison, was a not uncommon additive. Turpentine, used for thinning paint, and even tobacco oil. These were just some of the surprise ingredients that could show up in a Wild West whiskey. The first sip was probably the hardest. Many a cowboy, after downing the first shot, likely needed a second just to chase away the burning sensation and forget the taste altogether. If your stomach could handle the punishment, 2 or 3 glasses would send you into a chemical-induced hallucination that would leave you forgetting what day it was, let alone what you were drinking. But there is a reason these drinks were so unique. Saloons were often scattered far and wide across the vast frontiers with vast distances separating towns. Supply lines were anything but consistent, and there were certainly no government watchdogs enforcing food and beverage safety standards in the wild frontier. So, with no rules to dictate what constituted whiskey, saloon keepers were left to their own devices. Sometimes those devices got a little out of hand, but one thing was certain. A drink in the Wild West was never dull. Thankfully, those days are long gone. These days, you can enjoy a safe and delicious drink without the worry of surprise toxins or paint thinner disguised as whiskey. UFO Encounters. We often picture alien encounters and UFO sightings as something brand new, a product of our advanced technology age. But hold your horses. Stories of strange objects in the sky and peculiar visitors from beyond have been around for centuries, and the Wild West boasted its fair share of these exciting yet perplexing tales. One particularly wild story emerged in 1896 from a seasoned frontiersman with a knack for storytelling. His name was H.G. Shaw. He was a Civil War veteran and journalist living in Lodi, California. Shaw wasn't your average wrangler. He was a man of the pen with a keen eye for the unusual. One starlit night, while swapping stories with a friend, Shaw claimed they both witnessed a sight that would leave them speechless. According to Shaw's detailed account in the local paper, a group of otherworldly beings materialized before their very eyes. These weren't your typical cowboys. These varmints, as Shaw might have called them, were towering figures, 7 feet tall and slender with an unsettlingly different build. Their hands were small and delicate, but the most peculiar feature was their feet. It was twice the length of a normal human's and designed for gripping and climbing, eerily similar to a monkey's. But Shaw's story didn't end there. He even proposed a reason for these extraterrestrial visitors' arrival. In a bold claim printed in the Lodi News Sentinel, Shaw declared these beings to be inhabitants of Mars on a mission to snatch an Earthling. Sound familiar? Those classic alien abduction stories we hear today? Seems like these outlandish tales might have some historical roots after all. Now, Shaw's encounter wasn't the only time the Wild West skies seemed to hold something otherworldly. Just a year later, in the dusty frontier town of Aurora, Texas, folks swore they saw strange objects streaking across the vast expanse above. These weren't your average shooting stars. These were long, sleek shapes, like giant cigars gliding silently through the heavens. The townspeople dubbed them flying saucers, a term that would become synonymous with UFO sightings for generations to come. Then, a few short months later, the good people of Aurora witnessed an event that truly shook their belief systems. According to their wild tales, a UFO, one of those mysterious cigar-shaped objects, plummeted from the sky and exploded spectacularly right in the middle of their town. Skeptics, of course, scoffed, claiming it was just a meteorite that met its fiery demise. But for the folks in Aurora, the whispers of a crashed alien craft lingered for years after. Life on the frontier was certainly an adventure, filled with long stretches of isolation under a vast, starry sky. Perhaps these unique circumstances fueled the imaginations of these Wild West residents, leading them to interpret unusual sights as cosmic visitors. Or maybe, just maybe, there really was something strange happening in those dusty plains. Who is to say for sure? Cannibals in the Wild West. Now, if you thought stories about cowboys and spaceships were wild, buckle up for some truly legendary encounters. Way out in the Great Basin, around what is now Nevada, whispers of a nightmarish kind of giant have echoed through Native American tribes for centuries. These weren't your friendly giants from fairy tales. The Paiute people tell bone-chilling stories of a bloodthirsty race known as the Sitka. Imagine towering figures with hair as red as the setting sun, according to Paiute lore. The sight of them alone simply struck fear into the hearts of other tribes. But that's not all. The Paiute legends claim the Sitka had a taste for human flesh. The Paiute say the Sitka weren't just monstrous in size and appetite. They had a strange diet that supposedly contributed to their fiery red hair. According to the legends, the Sitka feasted on a water plant called tule that grew in abundance around the area's lakes and marshes. Apparently, this particular plant had the peculiar effect of turning hair a vibrant red, which would certainly make these giants stand out even more. These cannibalistic giants weren't just feasting on plants. The Paiute legends claim they stalked human settlements across the vast deserts of the Old West, long before any European settlers even dared to set foot there. The thought of these monstrous figures roaming the unforgiving landscape is enough to send shivers down your spine. But fear not, for the legend has a heroic twist. The Paiute people tell a story of how their brave warriors finally put an end to the Sitka's reign of terror. According to a Paiute tribal leader named Sarah Winnemucca Hopkins, who documented these stories, the Paiute devised a cunning plan. They lured the Sitka into a large cave. Once all the giants were trapped inside, the Paiute warriors sealed their fate by setting the entrance ablaze. The fire raged, and according to the legend, the Sea-Taka perished within the cave. Camels in the Wild West. The Wild West wasn't just about dusty cowboys and six-shooters. Back before the mighty transcontinental railroad stitched the country together, people had to contend with different kinds of challenges to conquer the vast, arid expanses. One of the most unusual things that took place in the Wild West was the attempt to utilize camels as beasts of burden. Sure, horses were king. They were fast, agile, and ingrained in Western culture. But camels offered something unique: endurance. These knobby-kneed creatures, shaped by millions of years of desert living, could trudge across scorching sands for days on end. The American West, while dry, wasn't quite the Sahara, and camels seemed perfectly suited to handle the challenge. So in the 1840s and 50s, supply trains experimented with camels on shorter hauls across various regions, from the dusty plains of Texas all the way up to the wilds of Washington. By the late 1850s, a man named Edward Fitzgerald Beale took the idea a step further. He wasn't content with just short trips. He aimed to prove camels could handle a major expedition. Beale assembled a caravan of several dozen camels and embarked on a grand trek all the way from the Midwest to California. News of this epic journey spread like wildfire. Pioneers, eager to tame the West, were captivated. One such believer was a Confederate major named Henry Wayne. Putting aside the harsh realities of the era for a moment, Wayne declared with genuine enthusiasm, "Americans will be able to manage camels not only as well, but better than Arabs, as they will do it with more humanity and with far greater intelligence." The United States government, seeing the potential of these desert-faring beasts, wasn't about to be left behind. In 1857, they purchased a whole bunch of camels for military purposes and settled them down in Texas. Then, the Civil War erupted, throwing everything into chaos. The opportunistic Confederates in Texas saw a golden opportunity in those unguarded camels. They rounded them up and formed the now legendary Camel Corps. These camels weren't exactly outfitted for military parades, but they were put to work nonetheless. These camels served in various capacities. Some were tasked with delivering mail and vital supplies across the region. Others, less fortunate, were captured and sold for profit, the money used to fund the Confederate war effort. At least one camel, Old Douglas, even saw combat with the 43rd Mississippi Infantry. Sadly, his bravery came at a cost. He was fatally wounded during the brutal siege of Vicksburg. However, the dream of a camel-powered Confederacy fizzled out. While camels were excellent at carrying heavy loads for long distances, they had two major drawbacks: slowness and temperament. When push came to shove, horses and mules proved to be the more reliable workhorses, so to speak. The story doesn't end there, though. After the war, some of the released camels, now wild and free, roamed the vast expanse of the West. One such camel, known as the Red Ghost, became a notorious figure in the scorching Arizona desert. Rumors swirled about the Red Ghost. Some say it was 30 feet tall and it trampled a woman to death in a frontier town. These wild camels, however, were not destined for a long life in North America. As the West was settled and tamed, the remaining few dozen eventually died out, fading into the dusty chapter of American history. The Crush Collision. The late 1800s were a boom time for railroads, and William Crush, a railroad executive with an eye for the dramatic, was determined to put the Missouri-Kansas-Texas Railroad, or Katy Railroad, on the map. Crush wasn't your average suit. He craved a publicity stunt so grand, so jaw-dropping, that it would have folks all across the country itching to jump on a Katy train. This man dreamt in exclamation points. His idea was to have a massive carnival, a spectacle unlike anything the Wild West had ever seen. The cherry on top would be a head-on collision between two massive locomotives. Crush would have two 35-ton locomotives smash head-on into each other in a glorious display of, well, Crush wasn't exactly clear on what this crash would symbolize, but hey, it would be big. And big it certainly was. Crush built his temporary town, which he cheekily named after himself, of course, and sent out invitations far and wide. On the day of the crash, over 40,000 people flooded into Crush, Texas. For a brief moment, it became the second largest city in the entire state. The crowd buzzed with anticipation as Crush set the scene. Two snorting, steam-powered locomotives, each a mechanical marvel in its own right, lined up on separate tracks, pointed straight at each other. With a mighty whistle, they were off. Imagine the roar of the engines, the plumes of smoke billowing into the sky as these iron giants hurtled towards each other at over 50 miles per hour. Then, the crash. A deafening explosion ripped through the air, a monstrous cloud of steam and fire erupting as the trains collided. Metal shrieked, twisting and warping under the immense force. The crowd, a moment ago eager for a spectacle, was now engulfed in shock and horror. 2 people were killed instantly in the wreckage. Hundreds more walked away wounded. One witness even lost an eye in the chaos and was later awarded a hefty sum of $10,000 by the Cady Company. Yet, amidst the tragedy, Crush's plan, in a dark and twisted way, worked. The Cady Railroad was now infamous. Everyone was talking about them, about the power of their locomotives, for better or worse. Newspapers across the country splashed the story on their front pages. The public was horrified, yes, but they were also undeniably captivated. Company officials, initially appalled by Crush's stunt, promptly fired him. But then, a funny thing happened. They saw the headlines, the national attention the crash had brought them. Soon enough, they were singing a different tune. Days later, after realizing the windfall of public attention they received, the Cady Company did an about-face. They rehired Crush and practically begged him for more outrageous ideas. Now it's time for today's subscribers pick. So far, we have seen cannibalistic giants roaming the desert as well as whiskey so potent it could knock you out faster than a bar fight. But there are even more unusual things that took place in the Wild West. In this intriguing image, we see a sharply dressed man observing an unclad woman with her hand bound upward. The Wild West was a place of lawlessness and moral ambiguity, where societal norms were often thrown out the window. This image could be depicting a scenario of exploitation, coercion, or even the darker side of the entertainment industry, such as burlesque shows. How do you think this image reflects the unusual aspects of the Wild West? What other unconventional scenes do you imagine unfolded in this era of history? Let us know in the comments section below. Gambling on the frontier. Even before the dazzling lights of Las Vegas beckoned gamblers from all corners of the globe, the Wild West had its own brand of high-stakes thrills. Back then, the spirit of risk wasn't confined to the casino floor. The very act of venturing westward was a gamble in itself. From unforgiving weather to lurking wild animals, the journey west was a constant test of survival. So it comes as no surprise that these tough characters, with a healthy dose of wanderlust and a gambler's spirit, brought their penchant for taking risks all the way to the frontier. And what better way to unwind after a long day of taming the wild than with a friendly or not-so-friendly game of cards? Saloons weren't just places to quench your thirst. They were bustling social hubs where folks could test their luck and maybe win enough to see them through the next week. Gambling in the Wild West wasn't some shady backroom activity. It was practically an esteemed profession. Just like doctors, lawyers, and shopkeepers, gamblers were respected for their skills. One historian even famously compared the prestige of a skilled gambler to that of a clergyman. The Wild West wasn't exactly crawling with employment opportunities, so professional gamblers had a niche. These card sharks, with their sleight of hand and steely nerves, traveled from town to town. High-stakes games with hefty pots drew skilled players from all corners of the frontier. Some gamblers, though, weren't exactly known for their honesty. Cheating and trickery were as common as tumbleweeds, and some wouldn't hesitate to fleece an unsuspecting newcomer before disappearing into the sunset with their ill-gotten gains. California, in particular, became a gambler's paradise. Throughout the 19th century, card players flocked to the Golden State, eager to test their skills and make a name for themselves. For many men seeking adventure and riches, the Wild West wasn't just a place to build a new life. It was a destination in itself, a land of opportunity where fortunes could be won or lost on the turn of a card. Gunfight at the OK Corral. The Wild West is a land of legend, and few tales are as ingrained in the public consciousness as the gunfight at the OK Corral. The story, like many Wild West legends, is riddled with a surprising amount of myth alongside the fact. The showdown went down on a fateful day in 1881, in the Arizona boomtown of Tombstone. On one side of the brewing conflict stood the Earp brothers, Virgil, Morgan, and Wyatt, alongside their formidable gunslinger friend, Doc Holliday. These men were known for upholding the law, at least in their own way. Facing them were a group of cowboys with a reputation for trouble. Billy Claiborne, the Clanton brothers Ike and Billy, and the McClory brothers, Frank and Tom. When the shooting finally stopped, the scene was grim. Both McClory brothers and Billy Clanton lay dead. The Earps, though wounded, had survived. But here is the surprising detail. The entire gunfight lasted a mere 30 seconds. Hollywood might have us believe that Wild West showdowns were long, drawn-out affairs, with men dramatically reloading their weapons behind cover. The reality of the gunfight at the OK Corral was far more brutal and swift. In the blink of an eye, a flurry of bullets erupted, and the West's most infamous shootout was over. Speaking of the name, there is another interesting wrinkle in this story. Technically, the gunfight didn't even take place at the OK Corral. For those who like their history accurate, the shootout actually occurred at the intersection of 3rd and Fremont Streets in Tombstone. This location was actually on a public road behind the OK Corral, not within the building itself. So, even the iconic name of this legendary event isn't quite what it seems. Jesse James Double Burial. Jesse James. The name itself evokes images of a notorious Wild West outlaw, a bank robber who struck fear into the hearts of folks across the frontier. But the story of Jesse James has a surprising twist, and it doesn't end with his death in 1882. After years of daring heists and living on the edge of the law, James attempted to settle down in Kearney, Missouri. He hoped to leave his outlaw past behind and live a quiet life on his homestead. Unfortunately, the Wild West wasn't exactly known for offering clean slates. James had made plenty of enemies during his outlaw days, and some folks held a long grudge. In a cruel twist of fate, James was betrayed by a former foe and murdered on his own property. Following the shooting, James's family made a peculiar decision. Worried that grave robbers might desecrate his body due to his notoriety, they buried him in the front yard of their Kearney farm. This unusual resting place served its purpose. James's body remained undisturbed for a while. Years later, his family decided on a more permanent resting place and reburied him in Mount Olivet Cemetery, a proper cemetery in a small Missouri town. But as unbelievable as it sounds, the story doesn't end there. Fast forward to 1948, long after the Wild West era had faded into history. A man named J. Frank Dalton emerged, claiming a shocking truth. He insisted he was the real Jesse James. Incredibly, a court even allowed him to legally change his name to Jesse James. The truth, however, was far less sensational. Dalton was a 101-year-old man, and he had fabricated the whole story. Despite the clear falsehood, when Dalton died, he was buried in Granbury, Texas, with locals fully embracing his outlandish claim. They celebrated him as the legendary outlaw and buried him with a fanfare worthy of a Wild West desperado, complete with a tourist attraction. The controversy surrounding James's supposed double burial grew so heated that science eventually stepped in to settle the score. Decades later, researchers exhumed the body in Kearney and used mitochondrial DNA samples to confirm its authenticity. Dalton's claims were definitively debunked. However, the power of myth can be a stubborn thing. Even with scientific proof, the legend of Jesse James being buried in Granbury, Texas, persists to this day. The Sutton-Taylor feud. The Civil War left its scars across the nation, and Texas was no exception. In the wake of the Confederacy's defeat, two families in DeWitt County, the Suttons and the Taylors, found themselves locked in a bitter feud that would leave a bloody stain on the state's history. It all began in 1886 with a bang, literally. Buck Taylor, a Taylor kin, shot and killed a man allied with the Suttons. 2 years later, tensions boiled over again during a horse sale gone wrong. This time, it was Buck Taylor and another man named Dick Chisholm who lost their lives. Fueled by vengeance and resentment, the Taylor family dug in their heels. They were fiercely proud of their Southern roots and deeply unhappy about the South's defeat. The Suttons, on the other hand, had powerful allies. They enjoyed the backing of local militia members and state police forces who were strong proponents of Reconstruction efforts. By 1869, William Sutton, the patriarch of the family, had taken control of the local police himself. He used his authority to launch raids across the state, targeting cattle rustlers who were believed to be sympathetic to the Taylors. DeWitt County descended into a horrific cycle of violence. Over the next 5 years, the feud spiraled out of control, engulfing the entire community. Even families with no direct connection to the Suttons or Taylors were forced to take sides, fearing deadly consequences for remaining neutral. Choosing a team offered no guarantee of safety, as both sides engaged in brutal skirmishes and senseless killings. By 1874, the death toll in DeWitt County had become alarmingly high. The Texas Rangers, a group known for enforcing law and order on the frontier, were finally called in to quell the violence. While their efforts to ease tensions weren't entirely successful, the feud did begin to simmer down by the end of 1875. This wasn't due to any diplomatic breakthroughs. Tragically, it was simply because the most aggressive and violent members of each side had been killed in the ongoing conflict. The following years saw a decrease in the frequency of killings, but the violence hadn't completely vanished. Estimates suggest that by the end of the 1870s, at least 22 members of the Taylor family had lost their lives, while the Suttons had suffered 13 deaths. These numbers don't even take into account the friends and allies caught in the crossfire. The aftermath of the feud stretched into the next 2 decades. Texas courts grappled with the complex legal issues arising from the violence. It wasn't until the very end of the 19th century that most family members and friends were finally able to move on from this dark chapter in Texas history. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video.